Welcome back to OpenLine tonight. Having a great conversation about the changes coming to our currency. Biggest changes to happen in a century, so this is worth talking about. I have Howard Cattell here with me, President and CEO of the Hermitage, of course, Tennessee home of President Andrew Jackson. And I want to learn more about Mr. Jackson. Kind of give me a brief overview. What do people learn when they come to the Hermitage?
Well, they, first off, or most importantly, they learn why we care about him today, why his home is preserved. Jackson was a man of many firsts, especially as president. But he was born in 1767. His parents were immigrants, had come to North America from Northern Ireland 2 years before. His father died a couple of weeks before he was born. His mother and two older brothers died during the Revolutionary War.
He was an orphan.
He was an orphan by the age of 14.
Wow.
And pretty much left on his own from that point on. He was born in the Waxhaws region of South Carolina. He, as a late teenager, he made his way to Salisbury, North Carolina, earned a law license.
Wow.
He studied under two lawyers, and then the state of North Carolina sent him west into the western district of North Carolina that today we know as Tennessee, where he started his climb to fame. He was very ambitious. He was hot-headed, as we all know all very well, and pretty rambunctious. He came here, started a law practice, was generating revenue from practicing law, but also traded legal skills for land. And that was his springboard to gaining wealth. In fact, in 2004, during the presidential campaign, Forbes magazine ranked all of the presidents by wealth. George Washington was the wealthiest. George H.W. Bush was the second wealthiest, and Andrew Jackson was third wealthiest.
But interesting, he did not come from wealth, though.
He did not. He was our first president that did not come from a wealthy family, a Virginia planter, or the Adamses of Massachusetts. That was part of his, one of the firsts, and one of his claims to fame, that he illustrated the promise of America, that a man born with virtually no privilege at all could rise in ranks to be the president, or back then called the chief magistrate of the United States.
Wow. Now, his administration, of course, came with some bumps and bruises, and his legacy comes with some bumps and bruises.
It does.
Let's talk about those. Let's talk about the Trail of Tears.
Okay.
What is his role in that?
That, as with any Jackson story, is complicated. Jackson pushed through Congress in 1830 the Indian Removal Act. And Jackson wasn't the originator of this idea that Native Americans and white Americans couldn't coexist. That there had already been removal of tribes, starting really in the 1600s, tribes pushed out of New England. But in the 1820s, during the Monroe administration, Indian tribes were removed to west of the Mississippi River, to what is today Oklahoma. There was a growing sense that the two races couldn't coexist. There was also a desire on the part of white Americans to settle in the lands that had been Indian territory, that we specifically think of as Alabama, western Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, and West Tennessee. So the Indian Removal Act was pushed through Congress, and Jackson signed it. It went through Congress with a small majority, because there was vocal opposition to the act, largely coming from New England, from evangelical people, today what we'd call evangelical people. More recently, some historians have said the support or the opposition to removing the Indians came from parts of the country where the Indian tribes had already been removed. So
Isn't that interesting?
There wasn't an economic interest.
Right.
Yeah. It's a harsh reality to think about today. So from 1830 forward, there were a series of treaties that forced what was called the five civilized tribes west. The Cherokees were the holdout, and in 1836, a treaty was signed that gave the Cherokee tribes 2 years to leave and migrate to Oklahoma. Some did and some did not. So in 1838, what we think of as the Trail of Tears started. At that point, Jackson was no longer president, and in fact, negotiators had been in Washington to stop the removal. And at the very last minute, Martin Van Buren had agreed to stop the removal, but the word reached the Army before the removal began. And so that there were tribes that were moved into holding camps, if you will, and that's where things really got bad because disease was rampant. They had inadequate food that the Army was providing them, and then by the time they left for the march, it was late summer, early fall. So they were making this trek on foot during a horrible winter. So it really is a blot on the history of our country. Indian removal was just a really bad, unfortunate idea to begin with.
You know, and because of Andrew Jackson's part in that story, a part of history, you know, when we talked about when this news hit last week, I think the Huffington Post did a piece calling him a monster, and then the Washington Post came in and did a piece, an opinion piece, saying you've got to look at the whole story here.
Yes.
And so there is just a lot of passion about his mark on history. Do you think more with him, more so than some other presidents?
He is probably one of the leading ones. I think more recently, Woodrow Wilson is starting to come under a lot of criticism. James Buchanan has come under a lot of criticism for not doing more to stop the Civil War, or not enacting other policies that could have prevented the Civil War. But Jackson gets, I think the challenge is that Jackson gets painted as being solely responsible for the Indian removal and Trail of Tears. The treaty that was signed while he was president had an option to the Trail of Tears that wasn't followed. The trail happened after he was president. Part of the suffering that went on was mismanagement by the Army. Clearly, he has a very defined role with the removal, and it was, as a recent author has said, he didn't think it was racial hatred. He thought it was greed. Now, I don't know if one is morally better than the other, but it was clearly there was greed, and then there were states that were lobbying Congress to do something about the Indians and remove them. In fact, one state threatened to secede if the federal government didn't do something about it.
Is this a part of his history that we talk too much about, you think?
I think it needs to be talked about because we need to understand that our history is complicated and messy and not always pretty, as much as we sometimes don't want to think that way. But we need to think about the other parts of his life as well, and the positive things that he did as president and for our country. The winning the Battle of New Orleans in 1815 in January was a huge military victory for our country, but probably an even bigger moral victory for our country because the country was so demoralized as a result of the War of 1812, having our capital burned. We lost almost as many battles as we won. Jackson winning that battle changed America's opinion of itself. Sort of like when you hit a home run.
Sure.
It also changed Europe's opinion of the United States. Because Europe, England in particular, but France and Germany and Spain saw the United States as this experiment in self-government. Then they were kind of waiting for it to fall apart, and they would pick up the pieces. And so winning that battle made Europe kind of sit back and say, you know, we're going to have to deal with them. They are a force to be reckoned with.
Very interesting indeed. We've got Bob who's been hanging on the line. Bob, thank you for your patience tonight. What's your comment or question?
Well, kind of like her coming on the money. She's not the first woman to be on money. Martha Washington was on, I believe, the first on the dollar bill. And about Jackson, if it weren't for Jackson, we wouldn't have Florida. And I believe that's where the Indian Sedition Act came from, which fell apart, of course, and turned bad. And you know, it's all over the slavery of sugar, whiskey, slavery, which was an external force, continual, round and round. But the idea of why we took Florida should be discussed more in history books, and it's not. Thank you.
Bob, thank you for being part of the conversation tonight. Any takeaways from that?
Martha Washington was on the dollar bill before her husband.
Well, go Martha. I did not know this.
Which I think is a wonderful point. And then also in the early 20th century, and I don't have all the dates, but there was an Indian, a Native American chief, and I believe it was on the $5 bill early on. So in some ways we were maybe, definitely we were more contemporary to the time then, and a little more diverse.
Yeah, a little bit more diverse. Also, Susan B. Anthony on one of the coins, the dollar
Correct.
coin, that used to be what I got when I lost my teeth. That's what the tooth fairy would bring me. I have a lot of Susan B. Anthony coins. And now she's going to be one of the folks featured on the new $10 bill.
That's correct.
I believe. Yes, Susan B. Anthony right there.
Appropriately so.
I would say so. Yeah, because not a lot of people would pay attention to those dollar coins.
They just did not get off the ground.
No.
And there's the presidential dollar coin series now that Congress enacted maybe a decade ago, where they're minting a specific number of coins for each president. And what's interesting is that some of them are just snapped up immediately. The Jackson coins disappeared.
Really?
Right. I mean, they were taken up right away. They didn't disappear. Well, there are some other presidents, and I won't name them, who they cannot unload. So it's causing some problem for Treasury.
And they've had some problems, haven't they? They always have some problems at their hands. All right, we're going to take another quick break. When we come back, we'd love to hear more of your questions or comments about the changes coming to our money. Go ahead and give us a call right now. We'll get you lined up during the break. 615-737+ is the number to call. Stay with us.